think what I do I need to say that we're the housing working group, right? The capacity building group meeting today. We're a little late from 5 to 6. Just going over some of the housing guidelines based on the capacity building group, right?
Yes.
And so I had pulled up something, I have everything at home. But I can pull it up again. I think what I wanted to go through was, and I went and I read it all yesterday, reminded myself of all of the pieces. But in general, it's the comments that we wanted to talk about regarding the capacity building spreadsheet that I'm looking for right now on here. Let me see if it's here. And I can pull up also the PowerPoint that we talked about last time, but it was kind of, it was going through what in general. Let me pull this up. I'm just going to go through it quickly, this PowerPoint, but it was going through Oscar and Jean's whole list. There were like 5 or 6 items that I thought we should discuss together to make sure that we agree with it.
Sure.
In the meantime, let me just go through and just open up what we shared at the meeting again, which was talking about the racial diversity, age distribution, economic diversity. The town-owned land, which is one of the items that they talked about, is town-owned land and opportunities for housing. And we can refer back to this. We talked about the public schools and the impact. And so one of the questions that we'll review in a second is, do ADUs cause impact? Versus multifamily, and the resources in general. So here it is, the ADU zoning, MBTA communities, and new neighborhood development.
One thing I think, and I have to say this is an original, I didn't really think about it until I was watching something on, honestly, it was either a news show or I'm not really sure. And we really didn't talk about the issue of workforce housing. And I think it was a town, might have been in Maine or whatever, was really having difficulty attracting teachers. And then it wasn't Maine, maybe it's someplace in the Midwest. Were having difficulty staffing their schools adequately. And they actually, as a community, invested in and built workforce housing for their teachers and, for prospective teachers. And, they said that it was a significant, advantage to attracting professionals into the town. Oh, I know where it was. It was actually suburban San Francisco. So housing costs are not that different than here, higher, certainly. Right. And they just could not attract, younger teachers into their school district. So that was one of the things that they took upon themselves to do. And so kind of nowhere have we really touched on that.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I see it. We have a place up in Quechee, Vermont, and they need to hire people in the summer because of the capacity then. And they have such a hard time because there's no housing and the people can afford it. And so one of the things that they're considering doing is building housing, for the students that come and become tennis coaches or whoever it is. Temporarily, it creates housing capacity that's affordable to them. And we were just in Big Sky, Montana, and my friend's son is teaching at the golf course there. And there are 9 or 10 kids like young adults, not kids. They're all graduates just graduated from college or that age group, early 20s. that 10 of them live kind of in dorm style housing because it is so expensive that otherwise they can't attract people to come work. And this, I mean, it's very different than in a town where, where you're a teacher, but it's a similar concept of creating housing that allows for the workforce. And that's what Jay was saying also at French Press. Like he has people that drive an hour to come help him and that are very qualified and that make a good living.
But that's why if you, Mike, you might have remembered the discussion at town meeting on the police getting out of the, civil service exams.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
all those civil service exams have a geographic requirement, and it's harder and harder to meet that geographic requirement when your housing costs are so expensive. So, it's a very significant issue, I think. So, I mean, there's all kinds of diversity in housing. But I really think we should incorporate that into our work.
No, and we've talked about that in terms of, for our education just here alone, the number of our teachers who are part of our district who do not live in the district, and hearing some of their commutes is pretty incredible for some of them, that they're committed to the district here, but they live however many towns away or drive however far away.
Like, do most of them, if they have children, they are permitted to bring their children in district, right?
Yes.
Like, do most of them do that? I mean, is that?
Great question. I don't know the percentage of that, but if that was something that we needed as a data point, certainly could get that. But there's a good number of them do, but a lot keep it within their own town just because of sort of that's their community and whatnot. So
their kids and their friends and their neighbors and everything.
Exactly.
But that's a really good question, because if you do create workforce housing, then that would increase the children at school, that would increase the capacity of other services that would have to be taken into account.
Absolutely.
Well, any kind of housing, yes.
Well, but different types of housing, right? So if you do elderly housing, that doesn't impact the schools as much as, it impacts other services, right?
Well, and workforce housing, if you think about it too, it really depends. It could be somewhat temporary. Let's say you have two teachers that are married, and, as they go on in their careers,
right,
they can afford a home somewhere. So it's not necessarily always a permanent thing,
right,
for each individual. So it would be a permanent benefit to our town to attract professionals, but
right. But it's all different types of workforce, and they all, depending upon the type of work, have different capacity requirements. Right?
Yeah.
Sure.
So there were like 6 or 7 of them I looked today. I'm just going to go through that. I just wanted to go through, and if you wanted to talk more about that, I'm more than happy to. I just wanted to make sure that we touched on these, which are the ones that have capacity building as part of it, as to get feedback from all of us on it. These are goals. A lot of these are goals. But these are the ones that I highlighted in gray that had the capacity piece on them. So number 11 is inventory town-owned land and identify those parcels, former schools, public use that could be used to build more housing, including those that might need regulatory zoning changes to make housing possible, and identify partners who might be interested in developing them. So regarding town-owned land, I think it's really tough to be able to use town-owned land for housing possibly. And I'm throwing it out there from when I sat on PPBC, our land is so limited, and our need for making schools larger or rebuilding some, or other town uses is pretty limited. So
Plus,
I'm
plus that most of that town-owned land lacks the infrastructure for, you'd have to put in additional infrastructure around a lot of those parcels in
Mhm.
terms of
Sure.
roads, sewers.
right. And so that's why I brought this up, because I knew that some of these questions were related to it. And the thing is that the town-owned land is owned by different departments. It's not owned by one group
Right.
or one entity. So I think this is something that can be asked, and I think it's gonna be difficult, unless it, it's, it's the, areas that are not as located in central to like the town. Because these are smaller lots, but, some of it is town forest, town forest is separate, some of it, I don't know. I think that's gonna be very hard to use town land when there's so little of it. But I don't want to discount it, because I don't know, there are some parcels in some of these areas that already have housing near them that could be an opportunity that really you can't build a civic building on them. So I guess the question is, who would be, there's so many different entities that own all of this. Who would be the person that we could ask, I guess, to understand any opportunity for this to occur? And I'm not sure if this is a question when there's a discussion of the MBTA communities and creating more opportunities near the town center, if there's some town land that could be swapped for something else, or I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's actually, they do have underneath capacity building is zoning, so it's really a question of, how would the zoning laws have to be changed in each of those business districts where there are town-owned parcels to even, put housing on that land. And as you pointed out, Natasha, they're not owned, all of this housing isn't owned by one entity. So, Park and Rec has jurisdiction over some of the land.
Mhm. Right, so we have the town of select board and DPW. There's the town conservation commission. There's the park and rec, there's the schools.
Mhm.
And then there's the trustees of Memorial Park. So, and Needham Golf Club and Needham Housing Authority, so. I guess that I think it's still worth asking, because I think holistically, if there's Needham Housing Authority also that is next to areas, this is St. Mary's. But I'm not as optimistic on the town land because it's stretched so thin.
I would agree. And I think certainly just to continue to ask the question. And then I think, however we decide to move forward, if this really can be something that has legs and a priority, but it might be too complicated to sort of, I know that it was sort of like categorized as somewhat complicated, but it might be more involved than initially thought.
Right. So I think it's worth asking if there are opportunities like the Stephen Palmer, building and others like that. I know that it's probably taboo to even say it, but I don't know if there are opportunities within the different town departments or in any location, especially with the MBTA communities, to see if there are ways of creating mixed use that will support civic projects as well. So, okay, so that's one of them. Let me bring up and I'll write some notes of items we're talking about at the end of this. The next one is this: integrate handicap accessibility and supportive services into new development, Programs such as those offered by the Small Repair Grant Program, Council on Aging, Safety at Home Program, or through assisted living options, as well as transportation and other home maintenance programs should be continued. Accommodations for special needs populations should be integrated into new housing production efforts. So I guess where the capacity building comes is like, are there programs in town that as we increase the accessible and supportive services would need to be increased as well to support them? And how that, you know, what do we need to do in town to make sure that as this grows, there's enough capacity for the services that are needed? I don't know. I don't know anything about this, so I would have to do research, but I don't know if either of you know.
Well, the
No,
small repair grant program and the Council on Aging Safety at Home, well, I don't know about the Council on Aging, the small repair grant program, you know, that's a pretty modest effort. I don't want to misquote, but it's no more than $50,000, and the average grant, I believe, is less than $5,000. So I don't think it's gonna, and that's basically designed to, yes, help people stay in their homes, you know, provide some kind of modest repairs and financial support around that. I wouldn't say that those were designed to provide special need populations with, you know, significant services.
I guess I'm wondering if what this is really trying to say is that maybe new housing to create all of the accommodations beyond what MAB requires, let's say, or whatever the requirements are for accessibility, that there could be incentives to create more accessible and supportive service, you know, in the new housing. Is that what this is trying to say? Beyond trying to integrate more accessibility into existing houses? Because I guess the question is, can the people that are living in those houses afford the houses and afford the taxes and afford all of the things when everything is increasing, right?
I
yeah,
mean,
I just see it for new, just reading it here, any new construction, new developments, that we're making sure that there's a good percentage that we're making sure are offered to have these accommodations.
right. That's the way I
Yeah.
read that.
Yeah.
But
So what capacity building is required for that?
well, it's hard to say because there's no suggestion as to, you know, what percent of, you know, new housing production should be set aside for special needs populations.
Right. Okay, that's a really good point. We can add that to it. But what it looks like, it's maybe changing zoning or encouraging the creation of more accessible units. Does that sound right?
I think that probably the thought there is any new housing production would be multifamily housing production, and they should, yeah, incorporate some type of special needs planning into that multifamily housing.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on to this one. Support the NHA initiative to upgrade all public housing conditions, starting with the MRI effort, which is underway. Consider opportunities with NHA properties where modernization renovation projects produce more efficient, higher density buildings that might yield buildable lot areas for additional deeply affordable or more diverse income affordable housing, possibly through an NHA developer partnership agreement. So how is capacity building related to this? Support, upgrade all the housing.
Well, it's more than upgrading though, right? They want to add additional units by changing the zoning so that they can be rebuilt to higher density. So those, depending on how those homes are populated, that would have an impact on schools, town support services. Probably less so on town support and more on schools, since that infrastructure is already there.
Mhm.
So you're, police, fire, sewer, all that is already servicing those areas. So it's just
Right.
expanding that part at the margins. I would think that that would have more impact on the schools.
And I guess the question here is, if there are more, it depends if there, if there are more units and there's more density, there should, with the property taxes, if there's ownership, affordable housing that has ownership capabilities, those taxes would be paying to increase the capacity of the schools. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
So I think for the Needham Housing Authority, I don't know what their tax structure is like, and I don't want to assume that I know, because I don't know. So I actually don't know if, in fact, if you expand the density there, I'm not so sure increased property taxes would cover that. I mean, that's a question to actually, I'm happy to ask Dave Davidson,
Mhm.
our town finance director. He would know, he would have a better sense for that. Certainly for kind of new builds, new multifamily housing builds, the non-affordable, the income stream from the non-affordable units,
Would be the one that
market rate units,
right.
excuse me, would have to provide, cover that increased school capacity.
Or right, or it could be from some of the other initiatives they're putting out here. For market housing or market projects that where there's a fee for doing some of this work. So I'm just trying to figure out. I agree with you with the Needham Housing Authority. The property taxes were probably minimal, but then where is the capacity? Is that part of the Needham Housing Trust? Is that what it's called? How do you create more capacity without new revenue?
You raise taxes
Right.
by 2.5%, or
have more business come to the community to get their
right.
tax.
And I think that's the thought. I think that the select board has really, and the town manager has really focused on growing, commercial, and diversifying the tax base so that there's greater growth in commercial revenue. So if in fact, when the Bull Fringe property, comes online, there'll be, substantially more tax revenue to cover.
Right. The support, capacity and support of the town.
Right. But that, just remember though, that, there's an operating cost and a capital cost
Right.
to anything associated with the schools.
Right.
And so incremental new revenue will help to cover increased operating costs from additional school capacity, students at schools. But then, the needed capacity is lumpy, right? So
Right.
if in fact at the margins you can add some classrooms, that's great. But if you need a whole new school, if in fact Hillside someday needs to be, I'm just throwing it out there, but
Yeah, yeah.
that's not going to be covered by
Right, that's a capital
It's-
cost. That's
That
the
would be a capital cost that in part would be borne by the town,
right,
the town residents.
right. I'm just trying to figure out what, where the capacity is and where the capacity building is and where the revenue for this will come from. Because I think that there are a lot of people that are very concerned that their taxes are gonna go up, that the town doesn't have enough capacity for some of these things, the schools and all of that. So thinking it through from every direction, I think is pretty critical when putting together some of these goals. Thinking about how these goals, how this program can sustain itself. So that leads to this update, number 24, update school master plan to study impact of recent housing developments and consider impact of proposed rezoning initiatives, consider need for school building renovations or additions. And there's needs further study, but it's capacity building. So I guess, Michael, the school master plan, will there be any updates that are gonna be reflective of all the current housing developments or any future?
That is something I think that will help this plan to sort of help inform. We had 4 sort of conceptualized plans that have now been scaled down to 2. As I was sharing with Carol earlier, we actually have a higher kindergarten population than we anticipated for this fall, and we don't have the official numbers. We'll sort of know that really the first week in October of sort of where we really land with enrollments. But we do have our demographer who we will be hearing from in Kibben at some point this fall to provide some really good projections, and just that this one year that we have more than 30 kindergartners than we were sort of anticipating, and sort of figuring out why. Is it just that a lot of them moved to town? Were they redoing kindergarten a second time and were in a other program and now a private program and now they're coming here? So sort of doing some more analysis, but we have our plans sort of in place, but they're not fully approved. And from the design firm who's sort of like helping build out in some of the schematics, now that at least we're down from 4 to 2, to sort of have a little bit more analysis of sort of how we're utilizing space. So that study's ongoing.
Is that Doran Whittier?
I believe, yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you're looking to figure out, you are growing. And
We are growing and
you're-
how does school capacity change in economy? How does school capacity change in pandemic? How do we account for if we have dips like we did sort of in the height of pandemic when some families decided to go out of district and went private, and then some of those families have returned. But yeah, if we have we have new housing developments and however many attract new families, how do we sort of encapsulate that into schools that are already pretty much at capacity?
And so I think 25 and 26 are other further studies. One is the capacity of town resources to address needs that may result from development arising from rezoning initiatives, including revising ADU provisions, addressing MBTA communities, law requirements, and other new neighborhood development. So I think understanding what the capacity of the zoning changes are, and understanding how that also gets implemented, I think mostly into the schools. I don't think the ADUs will have as much impact as new housing and rezoning for the MBTA communities, but I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I would think the same.
And then this last one is study public realm, streetscape improvements and transit alternatives that may be needed to handle traffic that may result from new development and to address needs of seniors and disabled, study parking needs. And so that is more of parking capacities. And I think right now we're doing it project by project is what we had determined. I think some of these initiatives that they had brought up, including down here, which is, I think, goals of looking at. There was one of them about looking at parking, like the Hersey, and looking at Needham Center to create mixed use with parking that could
Mhm.
be. So I think all of those regarding these transit alternatives that also deal with MBTA communities is going to increase the capacity of the town. And so how does the town, if it moves forward, how does the town accommodate it? Right.
Sure. And we're currently going through, if I recall from spring town meeting, that there was a study that was going to be looking at some of our parking.
Right.
Right.
So that's
And
ongoing.
who's doing it? The engineering department?
I know we appropriated money for it for an outside firm to sort of look at it. I can't recall sort of who's leading that, but it was one of the items that we sort of approved, that we're sort of looking at sort of all of our parking options. And certainly for MBTA parking has that, whatever decrease has happened at Hersey, for instance, over the last couple of years, not to say that it will resume to where it was pre-COVID, but will we sort of see what Hersey looked like back in 2018, 2019, when a number of people, including myself at that time, were sort of scrambling, trying to get there for parking, and there really
I
wasn't
was
the
too.
option. Yeah,
I know. If you got there after a certain time, you wouldn't be able to get parking, and so hopefully
you and
this
I could have been battling it out for
could
the
have-
last
I know.
days
Should have
and trying to
commuted.
find somewhere else. Yeah.
But I think having the density around the stations hopefully will allow people to not have to come and park. But even the Muzzy Ford site doesn't have a bus that goes through it, that goes down with the W, Webster and to Central. So I think it's understanding opportunities for public transit, that especially in areas where we're saying that there could be density, I think will be really important. But so this is kind of what I wanted to just go through with you, because they said capacity building. I felt like we at
Sure.
least needed to look at it. I went through all the other ones. Some of these are goals, some of these are not. Some of them are related to, future zoning of things that we've been talking about, but I didn't know if you had any other thoughts, but I wanted to make sure that we reviewed it together before we meet again.
Yep.
No, that worked for me. Yeah, that was good.
And so I don't know if you guys have any other questions. I mean, with ABTA communities came in, and Jean's gonna go through it and say what the changes were, and we can discuss that tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the questions that I would just have for that is, how does that impact for our community? At least for now, we have four stops on the commuter rail. Is that tied? How do we sort of look at each stop with that, and sort of like the radius that sort of gets appropriated? And then I think the question sort of out there is, how do we define what reasonable size is? It's certainly a question that I sort of have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Define reasonable size. Define reasonable size, and then the other ones that you had, the other thing that you mentioned is the density around the stations, right?
Yes. So how do we sort of determine if something were to be developed with our four different stations, and how does that impact each one? How are we sort of analyzing that?
And then for me, one other thing that I think is important for the MBTA is the as of right development versus special permit.
No, I'm just, when I think of all of this, I think a few years back with our what is it, the Hartney development that was proposed a couple years ago,
Mhm.
right by Needham Junction, and didn't move forward. But sort of like with this new initiative, how would it,
Well, I mean,
development like that, yeah.
if you remember that though, that really didn't move forward because at the end of the day, I think that a lot of people felt that was, you know, property specific spot zoning, really, to address one property. And there hadn't been kind of a full vetted plan on the Chestnut Street Business District and
Mhm.
how that should look and how that should be zoned. So it wasn't tied into anything. I think that is why that failed.
Mhm.
If that had it been incorporated into a larger, let's think about how we smartly can build out that area of
Mhm.
Needham, something might have been able to move forward.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you heard the Carter, the old Carter building
Mhm.
project that is
100,
being
right.
redone.
Yep. 100
Uh,
West.
That was supposed to have, non-assisted living housing units on the top, a few of them affordable, but the developer eliminated the non-assisted living units.
Right, so they had independent living and part of them were affordable. And so what ended up happening is that after, they basically put in a new application that does not include independent living. They are now, partnering with Balfour, which does assisted living. So there's two types, there's assisted living and memory, something living,
Memory care.
memory care living. And so they don't have independent living. And so they are going to be in the process of providing a financial support to the Needham Housing Trust because they're not doing it in their project anymore, is what I've heard. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. And so one of the things that I think will be important to ask them is, if you had enough FAR, would you consider, and if any relief, would you consider building some independent units with some affordable units at the corner of the site or somewhere else on the site that's not part of the main building, right? Is another question. Or what are the opportunities for you to do independent living to create some affordable units? And so that's a question. I wasn't there at the last meeting, and I just went and I listened to the entire meeting on Zoom yesterday. So we have a planning board meeting tonight. But that's something that I think I would ask because, and Adam and others, Jean asked about it as well. What are the opportunities? But they're not required to do it. And so they are required, they are looking for use changes, so relief on use, but they're not required to do independent living.
But that project was sold where the independent living and those modest affordable units were part of that plan.
I completely agree, and I'm trying to figure out, but what I understand is that there's no requirement for it because it's a different application with a different partner.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I just don't understand how that happened though, because you got town meeting to change the zoning laws for that parcel.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's what they were, town meeting was kind of sold on is not happening.
So would we have to, I guess the question is, would we have to go back to town meeting? Because town meeting changed the zoning laws
Maybe.
for this project, right?
I mean, I would think you would have to because the zoning laws were,
contingent
Change
on
to
the
it.
project, to the project being built a certain way.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So even
Whatever.
if it's a new. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I mean, I just don't know. I can't remember how it was drafted, so I don't know if they just are not putting on that kind of third story.
They are, but there's a fourth story. They are putting it up there, but they're not independent units, and it's based
Okay.
on. They're partnering with someone else. The other partnership, for whatever reason, dissolved.
So maybe that,
Okay.
I don't know, I'll see the warrant next week. So maybe there will be further, further zoning legislation that needs to pass town meeting to get that to happen. I just don't see how you can, pass one thing and then not build it and think you can, pay the
Or
Needham
do
Housing
something
Trust a
else.
dividend to make it go away.
Right. I am with you 100%. I'm trying to figure out, the same thing you are, is like, how can you change something and then change it back? So, that's a really good point. So, okay, so I'm gonna write up some meeting minutes. What do you call it? And then now we have the meeting tomorrow.
Yep.
And then we'll go through. So these are our comments based on what Oscar had sent. And Jean with the zoning group when they started putting all the goals together.
Sure.
And so if you guys have any other comments or questions, let me know, but I think at least we went through them together to see if there was anything
Yep.
related to capacity building that we were concerned about, or, and I'm gonna send out meeting minutes, and please make any corrections. I'm pulling them out
Okay.
right.
No, thank you for this. Glad to
Yeah.
meet, and we'll see everyone tomorrow.
All
Sounds
right.
good. Thank you,
Thanks.
and
Right.
sorry for being
Thank you.
late again. Okay,
Not a problem.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
bye.